In this video, we're going to look at the other two major prophets, Jeremiah and Ezekiel. In a lot of ways, these are twin prophets. They lived at roughly the same time, their careers overlapped, and they are primarily prophesying about the same events, but they do so from two different perspectives. And their perspectives reveal something to us about the impact of social location on prophets. I mentioned in the last video that there are some prophets that are what we call marginal prophets, meaning they were sort of outlaws, they were usually rejected in their own time, and then there are prophets who are what we call central prophets. Many of these are court prophets, they serve the king, but some of them may also have been affiliated with the temple. That would be the case with Ezekiel. Ezekiel was a Zadokite priest. In fact, both Jeremiah and Ezekiel come from priestly lines, priestly descent, but two different priestly lines. And to understand this, we have to go back to Solomon, to the time of Solomon. If you remember, when Solomon first becomes king, or when he's about to become king, there's a brief struggle between Solomon and his brother Adonijah, where they are both trying to become king, and so there's kind of a brief civil war. And Solomon, of course, is victorious, but each side had their supporters. And there were two high priests serving in Jerusalem at that time. One was named Abiathar, and one was named Zadok. And Zadok supported Solomon, Abiathar supported Adonijah. And when the dust settled and Solomon won, what happened to Abiathar was he was basically stripped of his priestly authority and went expelled from Jerusalem and went to live in this little village called Anatot. Anatot is the town that Jeremiah is from. So this is about 500 years later. I guess about 450 years later or so. But the events in the time of Solomon still continue to impact social location for these two prophets. Ezekiel is a Zadokite. And so we see in these two prophets that they both talk about the destruction of Jerusalem, but they have different understandings of how and why that happens. Their attitudes toward the temple are very different. And it probably has something to do with the fact that Jeremiah is part of a priestly line that does not serve in the Jerusalem temple, that lost that power. Now, as far as we can tell, Jeremiah did not serve as a priest. Jeremiah actually has strongly Deuteronomic theology, so he does not believe that there should be sacrifices offered anywhere other than the Jerusalem temple. He's a Deuteronomist, but he does not seem to share the priestly views about the sort of the gradated holiness of the temple, or the idea that God literally dwells inside the temple. So in priestly theology, God actually lives in the temple, in the Holy of Holies, above the Ark of the Covenant. That's where the presence of God, or the kavod, the glory, dwells. We don't find that kind of language in Jeremiah. In fact, Jeremiah's attitude toward the temple seems to be that God doesn't live there, and it can very well be destroyed. Don't expect that simply because this is the house of the Lord that it will be spared. In fact, he addresses that the people were saying things like, "This is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord," in sort of a chant that would protect the city. This is in Jeremiah 7 and verse 4. He says, "Do not trust in these lying words, saying, 'The temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord are these.' For if you are thoroughly amend your ways and your doings, and you thoroughly execute judgment between a man and his neighbor, then and it goes down and describes other behaviors, then God will cause them to dwell in this place, and they will live there forever. But if they don't do these things, then the temple will be destroyed." And so But in Ezekiel, his understanding is that, yeah, the glory, the kavod, does live in the temple, and the temple is only able to be destroyed because Yahweh abandons it. Um, so they end up at the same place. They both end up with the temple being destroyed, but they do it in different ways. Jeremiah's view is that it's very tied to the covenant. If you keep the covenant, you'll be all right. But Ezekiel has priestly theology. It has to do with clean and unclean. If the temple becomes defiled by the people's sins, then it can be destroyed because that defilement will cause God to abandon his house. It's like if your house became infested, with some sort of pest, or if there were something poisonous in your house, and you had to leave it for your own sake. That's what happens in Ezekiel. God has to leave the temple because it's become inhospitable toward him. So they end up at the same place, but for different reasons. Now, start with Jeremiah. Jeremiah, more so than any other prophet, we get in Jeremiah a glimpse into the mind and the life of the prophet. Jeremiah includes a lot of narrative, a lot of biographical material, much more so than Ezekiel and Isaiah, and really most of the prophets. Jonah would maybe be an exception, but we know a lot about Jeremiah. There's a lot of biographical material in this book, and what we know about Jeremiah is that he was not a willing prophet. He was a reluctant prophet. Now, he began his career during the reign of Josiah, which one of the great questions scholars wonder about is what if any, impact did the reforms under Josiah have on Jeremiah? And the evidence is mixed here, because Jeremiah never mentions the reforms of Josiah. It doesn't mention the discovery of the book of the law or any of the things that Josiah did. So that's kind of unexpected. On the other hand, Jeremiah is strongly Deuteronomic. Jeremiah is preaching about the same things that Josiah is doing, and would seem to have been a strong supporter of Josiah's reforms. So, one possibility is that maybe the reforms really weren't that widespread, and so Jeremiah simply didn't know about them. That seems rather unlikely to me. Another possibility is that Jeremiah began his prophetic career during the reign of Josiah, but before the reforms, and then he simply is not prophesying during the time of the reforms, because Jeremiah, as a marginal prophet, or at least the prophecies of his that are recorded, that's another thing to keep in mind, is that the prophets surely said more than what was recorded. And the themes of Jeremiah is strongly a book of judgment and condemnation. And if he was in agreement with Josiah's reforms, during those reforms, he may not have had much to say, and if he did have something to say, it maybe just didn't make it into the book because it didn't fit with the theme and the message of the rest of the book. So we may just not have any of his oracles dating from that time period, and that would explain why he doesn't mention those reforms, because most of his career is defined during the reigns of the kings who come after Josiah, by Jehoiakim and Jehoiakim and Zedekiah. But the impact of the reforms is not particularly clear. But he does have strongly Deuteronomic theology. Another thing about Jeremiah as a person is that he became a prophet at a very young age, probably a teenager, maybe around 20, probably a bit younger than that. He's called to be a prophet when he's young. So his call narrative is in Jeremiah 1, and God says to him, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." So he doesn't get a choice. This is not like in Isaiah where it's, "Hey, who shall I send? Who will go for me?" God points to Jeremiah and says, "I've chosen you. I chose you before you were born." Jeremiah does not want to be a prophet. He says, Ah, Lord God, truly I do not know how to speak, for I am only a boy. He says, I'm only a lad, the Hebrew word na'ar, a young, like a teenager. He says, I don't know how to speak. I'm not experienced. This is actually very similar to Moses. If you remember Moses, when called to deliver the Israelites, said he didn't know how to speak either. But God does not accept Jeremiah's response. He says, do not say, I am a youth, for you shall go to all whom I send you, and whatever I command you, you shall speak. So Jeremiah is not given a choice. And that will define his career, is that he is a reluctant prophet. And he will protest against it. He does not want to be a prophet, but he doesn't have a choice. God forces him to do it here. And the primary focus of his prophecy is very negative. It's focused on the Babylonian threat and the exile. But unlike, say, 2nd Isaiah, where you're looking back on it and it's more positive because, hey, we've gotten through it, Jeremiah is looking forward to it, and so very, very foreboding. Isaiah is a negative message, and a message that the people are not going to want to hear. So this is part of the reason, perhaps, why he doesn't want to be a prophet. Some of the main characteristics of this book is a very long book. It's actually the longest book in the Old Testament in terms of word count, longer even than Psalms, and it is characterized by a number of different themes. One of these is the rejection of the true prophet. So, again, Jeremiah as a marginal prophet is an outlaw. He does not have the ear of the king, but his job, he's kind of like Elijah, his job is to call out and critique the king and the people. And so throughout this book we see him doing that, and he encounters a lot of resistance. He's arrested when he sends a scroll containing his oracles to Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim burns them. Every time there's a line, they read a line of the text, he cuts it off and he throws it into the fire, rejecting his words. He is put on trial. He's arrested. He's threatened with death. The people want to kill him, and if not for a few city elders who come to his defense, he would have been executed. Even the people of his own town, the people of Anatot, plot against him. They make a plot to kill him, and God has to reveal it to him. One of the issues that Jeremiah has to wrestle with is that there are other prophets out there contradicting him. This is a Deuteronomic theme. In Deuteronomy, it addresses how do you know whether someone's a true prophet or a false prophet? Because there were lots of prophets, and they did not always agree on things. Jeremiah is dealing with that problem because the other prophets, the central prophets, the professionals, right, those who have the support of the king, are contradicting him. And Jeremiah is walking around with an ox yoke saying, this is how God is going to, Nebuchadnezzar is going to lead the people into exile, like this is the yoke of Nebuchadnezzar. But there's another prophet named Hananiah who comes and breaks that ox yoke and says God is going to break the yoke of Nebuchadnezzar and bring everyone back. Because some people had already been taken into Babylon. He says they're going to bring them back. Well, if you're the people, how do you know who to listen to? Hananiah is telling them what they want to hear. He's the prophet of good news. So the inclination is to listen to him. Deuteronomy's solution to this, Deuteronomy says, well, if a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord and what he says comes true, then he's a true prophet and you should listen to them. The problem with that is you only know about it after it's too late. If Jeremiah is the true prophet, you don't know that until after the exile already comes. And at that point, it's a little bit late to do anything about it. So it doesn't help you much. So Jeremiah says, well, if we look throughout history, more often than not, the true prophets have been those who spoke of destruction and doom. So if you're going to hedge your bets, you should err on the side of listening to the prophet who speaks of doom. If a prophet speaks of good things, well, then you should just wait and see. So play it safe. That's not what the people do. But Jeremiah's career is defined by his rejection. In a lot of ways, he's very similar to Jesus. Jesus is portrayed sort of in the tradition of Jeremiah as a prophet who is rejected and hated by his own people and persecuted. So going along with that, because he's a rejected and persecuted prophet, there's a strong theme of suffering in the book of Jeremiah. And we see this especially in what are called the confessions of Jeremiah. The confessions are laments by Jeremiah where he complains about being a prophet. So a complaint, a reeve in Hebrew, is a lawsuit. It's a formal charge. And Jeremiah lays several of these at God. He says, I didn't want to become a prophet. You forced me to, and I'm suffering because of it. This isn't fair. And two of these in particular I want to look at real briefly. In Jeremiah 12, this is one of Jeremiah's confessions. He says, Righteous are you, O Lord, when I plead with you. Yet let me talk with you about your judgments. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why are those who are happy? Why are those happy who deal treacherously? So he asks God a fair question. Why do the bad guys seem to have all the power? Why does it seem like you support and are on the side of the wicked? So he's looking around him at the people that he's supposed to be condemning as sinners, and they have all the money and they have all the power, they're doing well, and Jeremiah is the one who's suffering and persecuted and threatened with death. By the way, this is placed right after the plot by Jeremiah's own town against him, by Anatot. So he's maybe feeling that a little bit more strongly right now. So he asks here, why you seem to support them. He says, you have planted them, the wicked. They have taken root, they grow, yes, they bear fruit. You are near their mouth, but far from their mind. So he wants to know why bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people. So this is a question of theodicy. His question is not really given a clear answer. God says, if you have run with the footmen and they have wearied you, how will you contend with horses? Which I think is sort of a metaphorical way of saying this is nothing compared to what's coming. The rejection, the suffering you're experiencing right now, pale in comparison to the exile and the invasion that is about to come. So things are going to get a lot worse. So he's not given a clear answer. He does, there is, following this, there's a collection of oracles that describe how God has suffered as well. How the people have rejected God, just as they've rejected Jeremiah. How the people have turned against God, just as they turned against Jeremiah. And I actually published an article a few years ago arguing that if you read these two oracles together, that the second set actually gives kind of an answer to Jeremiah, is that, well, sort of an answer, is that even God suffers the rejection of the people, just as Jeremiah does. So that's something of a theodicy. Another one of these confessions that I want to look at real briefly is in chapter 20. This is the last confession. And here Jeremiah reflects back on the fact that he did not want to become a prophet at all. He says God has forced him to prophesy against his will. He says, "O Lord, you enticed me and I was enticed. You are stronger than I and have prevailed. And I am in derision every day. Everyone mocks me." He says, you forced me to become a prophet. You overpowered me. And he says, even when I said, I will not make mention of him. I will not speak anymore in his name. But there was like a fire shut up in my bones. And I am weary of holding it back, and I could not. He says, I tried not to prophesy. I tried to keep my mouth shut, and I couldn't. So this is kind of that ecstatic element there, right? He's not completely in control. So God forced him to become a prophet against his will, and he can't stop. So he's complaining about these things. This is the kind of the biographical stuff, the human dimension. In Jeremiah, we get a glimpse into the mind and the life and the emotions of the prophet in ways that we don't in other books. This book also has some vivid symbolism and imagery, some symbolic visions. In Jeremiah's call, in chapter 1, he sees a vision of a almond branch. So God says to Jeremiah, Jeremiah, what do you see? He says, I see a branch of an almond tree. And then God responds, I am watching over my word to perform it. Now, you read that and you don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense. What does the almond branch have to do with God watching over his word? Something doesn't connect here. It has to do with a word play in Hebrew. The word shakad. So this verb, shakad, means to watch over. But the noun, sheked, means almond branch. So there's a word play. These two words are very, very similar to one another. And this is a feature of divination. So we talked about this a little bit in the last video. In dream interpretations and other forms of divination, oftentimes there are word plays that mean something. So if you had a dream about this object, and that object sounds similar or is linguistically related to something else, then it might symbolize it. All right. So maybe a good example would be like, say, the word spring. In English, spring can mean a lot of different things. It can mean a season. It can mean a metal boingy thing. It can mean water that comes up out of the ground. It can be a verb meaning to jump. So maybe if you had a dream and you saw a metal spring, it might represent one of those other things. It might represent the season. In the spring, this is going to happen. That'd be a word play or a pun. So we see those kinds of visions in Jeremiah. He has a vision of the uncreation of the world in chapter 4. He looks on the earth and he says, Lo, it was waste and void. And the words used there, tohu vabohu, same words that are used in Genesis 1 to describe the uncreated state of the earth. That when God first creates it, and it says everything was formless and void, the words there are tohu vabohu. So Jeremiah sees kind of that the earth is returned to that primordial state. So this is kind of maybe a precursor to apocalyptic eschatology, which we'll talk about next week. Jeremiah talks a lot about idolatry. One of the main sins of the people is that they are worshiping other gods. And so he asks rhetorical questions. He says, has a nation changed its gods? He said, look around, look at the other nations. Do they worship gods other than the ones that are their nation's gods? Are they unfaithful to their own gods? He says, but look, my people have changed their glory for something that does not profit. He says, you're not even as good as the pagans. Even they know the God they're supposed to worship. It just happens that those gods are not real, but yours is. Some would say Jeremiah is actually the first monotheist, not second Isaiah, because the way he talks about the gods here, he calls them no gods, as though they don't exist. So monotheism may actually have developed a little bit earlier. Some scholars say Jeremiah is the first monotheist. Some would say second Isaiah is. He makes fun of idolatry, of the idea of someone building something and then worshiping it. He says, you go out and you cut down a tree and you say to it, you're my father, or to a rock, you're my mother. And that doesn't make any sense. They can't do anything for you. They're the work of your own hands. So he speaks about against idolatry strongly. One other thing that I mentioned a little bit in the last video was about the formation of prophetic books. And Jeremiah is a very clear example of this. I mentioned that we have two different versions of this book. In the Hebrew text, or what's called the Masoretic text of the Hebrew Bible, we have one version of the book, and it is longer. It's the longer version. It's about 1/7 longer than the Greek version. And the arrangement of the materials is that first you have a collection of oracles against Judah and Jerusalem. Then you have oracles of salvation, a message of hope where it talks about how God will establish a new covenant with the people. This is important later on in the New Testament. It says, that after the exile, God will bring them back. I will restore the fortunes of my people, Israel and Judah. I will bring them back to the land that I gave their ancestors, and they will take possession of it, and God will make a new covenant with them. And then the book ends with a collection of oracles against other nations, and culminating in an oracle against Babylon. But when you look at the Septuagint, the Greek translation, not only is it shorter than the Hebrew, but the material's in a different order. So you have, again, at the beginning, you still have the oracles against Judah and Jerusalem, but then the oracles against other nations move up, and they come next, and the message of hope and restoration comes at the end of the book. So what this suggests to us is that, again, Jeremiah speaks all these prophecies, but he doesn't put the book together. People collect his oracles, and they build an anthology of his book, of his prophecies, probably after he dies, or certainly after they come true, after Jeremiah is proven to be a true prophet, they put them together. And it seems that in the case of Jeremiah, there were two different communities, two different groups of people who had access to his oracles, and they built different books out of them. They arranged it differently and created a different message out of it using the same material. So it's like, if I had a bunch of Legos, if I dumped out a bunch of Legos on the floor, and two different people came along and they built different things out of those Legos. They're using the same materials, they're using the same blocks, but they're building different structures out of them. So we get two different books of Jeremiah. And that is probably a good indicator of how prophetic books were formed. It just so happens that with Jeremiah, we have two different versions, whereas with the others, we mostly have one. So that's Jeremiah. Now moving on to Ezekiel. Ezekiel, again, a contemporary of Jeremiah, but coming from a different social location. He is a Zadokite priest. And so what we find in his book is language that is very similar to the priestly literature, to books like Leviticus and Exodus. He talks a lot about the temple and the rituals and even the structures, particularly at the end of the book. Chapters 40 to 48, he sees a new temple because the old one was destroyed. And he describes in terms very reminiscent of, say, the later chapters of Exodus about what the furniture and the different rooms in it must look like. So he's preoccupied with priestly concerns. Because he's a Zadokite priest and in power, he is actually taken to Babylon. So Jeremiah gives us the perspective of the exile from those who lived in Jerusalem when it happened. He is not taken to Babylon. He's not important enough. Ezekiel is. He is taken in the first wave of exiles who go to Babylon in 597 BC with the king, with Jehoiakim. So he prophesies from Babylon. He represents those people. And that shapes his book. We see this even at the very beginning of the book. In his call narrative in chapter 1, he sees a vision of the throne of God, in some ways similar to Isaiah 6. But he is in Babylon. He's not in the temple. He is standing beside a river in Babylon, and he sees the throne of God. It's surrounded by cherubim, by these heavenly creatures. And upon this throne, he sees something that looks like a human form. He sees God, the glory of God. There are wheels, so he mentions that next to the cherubim, there are these things that are wheels within wheels, and it's up above all of that he sees God, and he sees the throne. Now, if you put all that together, the imagery here suggests that of a portable throne, right? Think of like a chair, like an office chair that has wheels on it. In the ancient Near East, thrones often had images of mythological creatures on the sides of them, on the armrests. Cherubim would be among those. So we find cherub thrones. So God is sitting on a cherub throne, so you get the cherubim down at the bottom, and there are wheels. So it's like an office chair that can move around. It's a portable throne. The Persian kings had portable thrones where they could travel around. So it's a chariot. It's a chariot throne. So they could go out and tour their empire. And this is very significant because it reveals that God is now being visioned as a universal God, not just the God of Israel. He is in Babylon. Ezekiel is in Babylon when he sees this, and God is there. God has gone into exile with the people, and he's still God. He's still seated on his throne. That's important. That's really, really important for Ezekiel because it suggests that the remnant, the good people, are those who went into exile. So, who's being punished here? Is it the people who go into Babylon? They were the problem, and the exile is punishment. In Ezekiel, it actually seems not to be the case. It seems like the people who go into exile are the remnant that God is saving and is going to bring back. So they're the good guys, and God goes with them. So one of the major themes in Ezekiel is what we call divine presence and absence. That God has abandoned the temple because it was defiled. So Ezekiel has a vision in chapters 8 through 11. He is taken back, actually carried by his hair back to Jerusalem, and he sees the temple, and he sees that it's become defiled, that there are, he says, go into the temple and see the vile abominations that are committed here. So I went in and I looked, and portrayed on the walls all around were all kinds of creeping things and loathsome animals and the idols of the house of Israel. He sees people worshiping the Babylonian god Dumuzi. It says the women are weeping for Tammuz. So, and this is taking place inside the temple. They're worshiping other gods, and that has made it an inhospitable environment, so God leaves. And God goes with the exiles into Babylon. And that leaves the temple vulnerable. So when he sees the glory, the kavod of God abandon the temple, it goes into exile. It goes to Babylon. But the glory is present with the people in exile. So this, again, social location really comes into play here. He is one of these people. Ezekiel is one of the strangest prophets when it comes to his actions. He engages in symbolic actions. God instructs him to build a model of Jerusalem and to play war with it, to sort of act out the siege on Jerusalem. He's told to lay on his side for 390 days to symbolize the exile of the northern kingdom, and then to lay on his right side for 40 days to symbolize the exile of Judah. So imagine if you saw this guy laying out on the ground for over a year. How strange that would be. He's told to eat food cooked over cow dung to symbolize the harsh conditions of the exile and the harsh conditions that will exist in Jerusalem during the siege, that these are the kind of things that the people were resorted to doing. So Ezekiel's a very strange prophet. And like Jeremiah, his focus is on the Babylonian exile, but in a different way. He doesn't focus on the breaking of the covenant well, he does talk about idolatry, but his focus is on the defilement of the temple, not on the covenant, but on priestly concerns. So if you were to think in terms of theological traditions, Jeremiah represents the Deuteronomic tradition that we would see like in the Deuteronomistic history. They break the covenant, and the result is they're sent into exile. So Deuteronomy, right? Deuteronomy says, if you break the covenant, you'll be scattered among the nations. That's where Jeremiah is coming from. He broke the contract. Ezekiel, on the other hand, is priestly. So his concern is defilement, that the temple has become unclean, and that necessitates that God abandon it, and that leaves it vulnerable. Right? But God goes with the exiles. He goes where it's clean. Right? He goes with the good people. Ezekiel also, like Jeremiah, does have an optimistic outlook that after the exile there will be salvation. So he has, at the end of the book, from chapter 37 onward, is oracles of salvation and restoration. So in chapter 37, he sees a valley filled with dry bones, and God asks him, Can these bones live again? And as he watches, the bones come together and they form a body, and flesh grows on it and it comes back to life. Now, he's not talking about resurrection of the dead. He is talking, this is symbolic. It's not talking about actual people coming back to life. It's talking about the nation being reborn. That a nation that was destroyed and left for dead comes back to life. So it's symbolic. He sees, so it's in Ezekiel that we really start to see apocalyptic eschatology develop. He sees a future battle, Gog of Magog. Gog is distant lands. So Gog and Magog are like the steppe lands of southern Russia, or like Afghanistan and Ukraine, those areas that the barbarian hordes will come and will invade Jerusalem again, but God will save the city. So it's kind of a transformed Zion theology. God will deliver the city. And this is a precursor to the apocalyptic theme of the eschatological battle, like the Battle of Armageddon in Revelation. It's in Ezekiel that we start to see this idea of a future battle where God personally will come down and destroy the wicked. He sees a temple, a future temple, but it doesn't seem to be the temple that is actually rebuilt. It could be an eschatological temple. A lot of Ezekiel's visions later on will inform the book of Revelation. There's a lot of similarities between them. So when he sees the temple, it's on this cosmic mountain, and there's a river flowing out from it to the Dead Sea, and it purifies things. It brings life. The tree of life is there. And this is all stuff we see in the book of Revelation. It's sort of a return to the Garden of Eden. So this is apocalyptic. It's the end of the world. It's the new heavens and the new earth. So some of those apocalyptic themes, angels of doom. He sees angels that are sent by God to destroy Jerusalem, or to bring judgment. That's sort of angels and demons. That becomes a really important theme in apocalyptic. So God doesn't work simply through nations anymore. Behind the scenes, there are supernatural forces at work. The angel-guided tour. So in chapters 40 to 48, when he's touring this eschatological temple, he has an angel that accompanies him and explains things to him. This is called the interpreting angel. I wrote my dissertation on this, so I've published a book on this. And this is a major theme in apocalyptic literature, but it shows up first in Ezekiel, so he's trending in that direction. And all these visions and speculations about the throne of God are also something we find in later apocalyptic literature. So we'll see this in the book of Daniel next week as well. A lot of similarities there. So Ezekiel is sort of that bridge that seems to connect prophecy to apocalypticism. But that concludes this look at Ezekiel. So again, this week we're looking at the major prophets. So it would be a good idea for you to make sure that you can differentiate these three prophets, that you're able to identify when they lived. So Isaiah in the 8th century, Jeremiah and Ezekiel are in the 6th century, late 7th, early 6th century, and also know about the issues in each book. So Isaiah focused on the Assyrian threat, but then 2nd Isaiah is looking back on the Babylonian exile. 3rd Isaiah is in the restoration period. Know why we think 3 different books of Isaiah wrapped up into one. For Jeremiah and Ezekiel, know that they're both talking about the Babylonian exile, but doing it from different perspectives. That Jeremiah is in Jerusalem, Ezekiel is in Babylon. Know the social elements there. How Jeremiah is a marginal prophet, Ezekiel is a central prophet. So with that, I will leave you to this week's quizzes and discussions.